Umbrella Academy Season 2 has been met with mostly positive praise from critics and viewers alike, some of whom even enjoyed it more than Season 1. Personally, while it wasn't an outright awful follow-up to the amazing first season, I believe that the show could have been much better if a few key aspects of this season were done differently. I also have a theory as to what happened behind the scenes that caused Season 2 to struggle in places that Season 1 soared. My name is Bayden, and today I'll be talking about why I think that Umbrella Academy Season 2 missed the mark. On the screen right now is an overview of the points I'll be tackling. The first thing I'd like to do is go rapid fire through some of the ideas and concepts that the writers touched upon in Season 2 that I thought were brilliant. Let's get going. Overall, the idea of them arriving at the past in different times is a fantastic setup, and I'm so glad that they used the time period they were setting it in to challenge the characters in different ways. There are also some really standout moments for individual characters, like how Diego's stutter comes back after Hargreaves berates him in front of the group for being in over his head.
You're wrong.
In 2 words, the actor conveyed more emotion than Luther did over 2 seasons. I think Luther finding a new father figure is awesome, and has so much potential for developing him beyond the big, dumb gorilla guy. Ben also had some really interesting moments this season. The whole possession arc with Klaus was a great development for their relationship, and his final moments with Vanya were some of the few truly emotional beats of this season. Now, I say all of this to make sure it's clear that I recognize the writer's talent, and I respect the hell out of everyone who worked on this show. As I'll explain later, I don't think there's any one person who's to blame for this season's shortcomings. However, all of the positives I just mentioned account for only a small part of an otherwise weakly constructed season. Let's talk about the problems. The following fall under the general issue this season had with stakes.
Time travel!
Is a difficult plot device. When done right, it can be amazing. But when the rules aren't clearly established and followed, the stakes of a show can be drastically lowered. Umbrella Academy has an especially difficult job making time travel work because the Commission is built up as an omnipotent overseer of the timeline. The show then has to come up with reasons why the upper management don't just send a battalion of people with guns to shoot each of the Hargreaves kids as they emerge in the alleyway. The final fight scene with thousands of agents appearing poses a similar problem, where they seem to be an undefeatable force that the writers have created, and so they have to be wiped out in a single blast from Vanya. I think the writers also forgot the ending of Season 1, Episode 6. This season, the Commission is back at full force with no briefcase shortage, which once again begs the question of how time works for them. While there are definitely exceptions to this, I think that a villain you can understand, at least power-wise, is much scarier than one who is just all-powerful, all-seeing, all-knowing, and can do anything. Since we're already talking about following rules within the universe, let's talk about that opening 5 minutes. Allison rumors a group of 3 soldiers, saying, "I heard a rumor that blew your minds," and their heads explode. If you're caught up in the action, this really doesn't matter. But when you think about it in the context of the world they've built over 2 seasons, this doesn't make any sense. Her powers then are going beyond manipulation and command. This adds to a growing concern I have with this show, as fewer and fewer restrictions are being put on characters' powers. Another example of this is 5. Towards the end of the show, he is able to tick back time a few seconds. Now, while this is a cool development of his character, I'm afraid that the writers have written themselves into a hole for the next season, where any problem that the family runs into should be solved by 5 just ticking back the clock a few seconds. Finally, on stakes, there's Lila. She's a mess. The big reveal at the end that she has the ability to mirror powers was only foreshadowed once. That fight scene doesn't play in a way where the audience is supposed to be focused on how she's doing that. It kind of plays off as just she has excellent fight training. The next few points are problems with the story itself. There was a lack of follow-up in things brought up in the first season. The Season 1 finale clearly implies that this next adventure will have more to do with their younger selves. It's worth noting that in the recap that happens before the first episode of Season 2, when they're showing that scene where the camera pans around and they go into their kid bodies, they actually cut it before the kid bodies are revealed. They cut that shot. So they're clearly trying to change direction. Continuing on with lack of follow-up, everyone saw Klaus summon Ben's ghost during Vanya's concert, but only one person asks about Ben at all this season. Diego also had a love interest in the first season, Detective Patch, who is all but forgotten now. I don't think he still needed to be hung up on her, considering how long it's been for him, but I do think addressing it in some way would have been interesting for his character. Now, in this season, no one really knows if the others are alive or where they are, so I understand that they didn't immediately go freaking out about where Vanya was, but there's a lack of concern about what Vanya's doing, considering that the last time they saw her, she destroyed the world. In fairness, we do get the scene where Luther goes to the barn with the gun. It's possible that my problem here is less about Vanya specifically and more about the fact that we didn't see the family searching for each other at all. But I understand if they had to cut that, considering the runtime of the show. But it's time to talk about the apocalypse in the room. There have been a lot of discussions about the decision to jump right into another apocalypse. Personally, I don't have much of a problem with it, except that it doesn't feel as exciting the second time around. There are only so many ways this season could have ended. I think that a much bigger problem here is that the villains are the same, just worse than season 1. The Swedes are awful. They were a poor substitute for Hazel and Chacha, who brought comedy and tension to every scene they were in. They also just bring back the Handler, a villain who was fairly unengaging and through Resurrection somehow got more boring and annoying to watch. The best season this villain was Carl, and you can't change my mind. I was genuinely threatened by him. Every time he was there, he stared into my soul. Okay, now one more rapid fire round through some specific things I didn't like. 5 breaking the fourth wall staring at the camera while text popped up around him was awful. You can only make stylistic choices like that if you're going to use them more than once. And those fart gags are so beneath the level of quality this show usually is. Klaus was horrible to Ben this season. I mean, really, kind of awful. He tells the family that Ben couldn't time travel with them even though they all got to see him for the first time in years last season, which is just a cruel thing to do. Ben hasn't spoken to his family in decades.
I've missed you all so much.
He was so reluctant to let Ben possess him as well, which I didn't understand. But then again, all Ben wanted to do with Klaus's body was flirt with a random cult girl who he was in love with for some reason instead of, I don't know, talking to his family for the first time in decades. They also dumbed down Luther even more this season. I don't get it. He was supposed to have once been the team leader, but instead they make him a bumbling buffoon who talks to people like he doesn't know how weird he is. He has that whole comedy routine with 5 where he can't lie and he looks like a sad puppy when talking to Ray. What happened to the season 1 Luther who asked Diego,
"Is he just an animal to you too now, Diego, huh?"
Enough!
Speaking of Diego, Diego's obsession with JFK? Really strange, incredibly forced. They try to rationalize it by incepting the idea that he has a hero complex into our mind, but Diego was never a raving lunatic in season 1, so their efforts fall flat. And sure, everyone in the Umbrella Academy is an idiot, but even lunatic Diego should realize that if an apocalypse is gonna happen, perhaps altering American history and saving the president is what's gonna cause it? Guys? Then there's Reginald Hargreaves, who was just weird this season. His mannequin office was never explained or explored. He's an alien as well, which I know was in the comics, but it did not need to be addressed this obviously. In fact, the Majestic 12 were a weird addition to the season, considering we already have a secret society, so having another, less powerful, less threatening group makes no sense. There is an overall issue with editing this season. I'm going to give you the most egregious example, but there are smaller cases of this all throughout. Episode 8 ends with Vanya losing control of her powers as she is drugged and electrocuted by the FBI. As her powers escalate, we see the FBI agents cranking up the voltage, trying to kill her, but nothing happens. The sound design has sparking electric sound, so we definitely know that the electricity is still coursing through her, causing her powers to spike out of control. Allison, Diego, and Klaus arrive in time to see every FBI agent in the building is dead. Even Klaus comments that since all of the FBI agents are dead, why do they even need to save Vanya? Who are they saving her from? We then cut back to her, and she's still tied to the chair with all of the wires hooked up to her. So the implication is that even though the agents are dead, she's still being electrocuted, so her powers aren't shutting down. Then episode 9 starts, with Allison, Diego, and Klaus all failing to get into the room with Vanya. Klaus looks up at Ben, who realizes he's the only one who can do it, and he walks unbelievably slowly towards the room with Vanya, title card. Then we cut to Luther and Five mulling around, and all of the tension from that scene is dispelled. We get back to them though. Ben goes into the room, and we're wondering, how is Ben going to untie her? He then goes into her mind. Cut to some scenes with Harlan. Cut to more scenes with Lila. Cut to more scenes with Luther and Five, including a slow motion pan around where Luther is clutching his balls. Cut back to Ben. Vanya's crying about not being able to control herself, and Ben's like, it's not too late. The whole time I'm wondering, what are they talking about? Vanya has control of her powers. She's being electrocuted. That's why she lost control. So why are they talking about her as if she's causing this? Now this is a side effect of the writer's decision to have Vanya completely in control of her powers this season. You can't backtrack and try and make a climactic moment revolve around her feeling horrible for not controlling her powers.
What's wrong with me?
Then Ben dissipates and Vanya powers down in the real world. Back to Five and Luther and the dramatic climax of their stories happening. And at this point I'm conflicted as to whether I should be relieved that they saved the world or scared again because they failed to save the world. And the two plotlines are working opposite from one another. Then Vanya wakes up and she's not being electrocuted anymore and she's untied. What? When did she get untied? They just didn't resolve that. They never resolved any of the problems that were presented to us. It's like the filmmakers changed their mind halfway through and decided, nah. Actually, while we're on that topic, no one knows that Ben sacrificed himself except Vanya and Klaus. Fuck it. Luther and Allison don't even know Ben came back with them.
Hi everyone, Bayden from the editing room, I guess. The first scene of episode 10 is the funeral for Ben from when they were kids. And this is coming right after episode 9 where Ben dies. And this sort of serves as a substitute funeral. It's a really clever placement of that scene, and I just wanted to point it out because the writers did a lot of great stuff with this season. It just didn't all quite land, but they are very good.
Also, was Vanya going to leave without telling Klaus Ben's final words? Oh, and Ben's final words about how Klaus wasn't the one who made him stay and he was afraid of the light? Kind of cool, but where was the character development for Ben? It wasn't presented earlier in the season, so it just comes out of nowhere. I cannot stress this enough. Episode 8 and Episode 9 had so many problems in terms of tying storylines together and continuing character arcs. Actually, this is a trend throughout the entire season, and I'm going to demonstrate it with a couple of charts. The first one I'm pulling up right now is a comparison between the first episode of Season 1 and the first episode of Season 2. What you're seeing listed here on the left are each of the different scenes in that episode and the main questions that the audience is wondering in each scene. The ones in green are answered in this episode, and the ones in red are answered later in the season. The arrows then show you what scenes the questions are answered in. And so as you can see in Season 1, Episode 1, they pose loads of questions, and many of them get answered several scenes after they're posed. There are questions in red that are really big questions, like how the world is going to end, and those are the ones that are going to grip the audience's attention the most. But there are also enough in green that get answered that the audience does feel like it's learning stuff at a pretty brisk pace. What I like here is that even within one episode, you can see how the writers are drawing out reveals. They're not quite telling you everything straight away. You'll also notice that there are a lot more questions in Season 1, Episode 1 than in Season 2, Episode 1, which we're going to look at now. As you can see here, not only are there fewer questions, but they're getting answered much faster. In fact, some questions are being posed and answered in the exact same scene. And what this means is that there's less tension moving through the episode. Now, while I'm sure you could do that exact same thing for every episode in Season 1 and Season 2, I don't have time for that. So, the second chart I'm going to show you is kind of like a cut down version of that. So what this shows you is the final cliffhanger of every episode, and in which episode that cliffhanger is resolved. So what you'll notice is that a lot of episodes in Season 1 end with a question or a mystery that isn't resolved until episode 7, 9, or 10. So they're making the audience wait for answers. I think that's fantastic story structure, especially for a show that's going to be binged. Then we go to Season 2, and at first it does quite well. It poses questions at the ends of episodes that aren't answered until later. However, you'll notice that there are more occasions where the episode ends with a cliffhanger, which is answered in the very first scene of the next episode. It shows an overall trend that Season 2 does a worse job of building tension and momentum. Okay, enough charts. I've done a lot of complaining so far, but I haven't offered up any solutions. So it's time for the fixes segment. I've separated this into 2 parts. Let's get into part 1. 3 small fixes. Carl should have been suspicious of Vanya from the very start. If this had been foreshadowed from the beginning, the whole season the audience would have been wondering, when is he going to turn her in? The family would have no idea about it, but the audience would. Small fix number 2, Lila should have been in a situation where she was using some of the Umbrella Academy's powers, but it wasn't totally clear. She just needed more foreshadowing in general, and I think it would have been easy enough to do that, because she's in quite a few fight scenes. The final small fix is that Ben should have talked about not going to heaven to stay with Klaus earlier in the season. They could have easily added a scene where Ben was complaining to Klaus about being dragged along on his adventures while Klaus did all these weird things that weren't helping him. And in that scene, he could have snapped and said, well, I don't want to be here, so why don't you just let my soul go to heaven? I was on my way there and then you dragged me here. With a scene like that, we introduce the idea that Klaus is feeling guilty, that he's keeping Ben on this plane for relatively selfish reasons. And that's an excellent arc for Klaus, where Klaus is afraid of losing his one and only friend, but he doesn't quite know what to do, and he's not in control of his own life enough to make the right decisions there. So then, when Ben sacrifices himself, it's this big moment where Klaus is both letting him go and also being relieved of the guilt that was on his shoulders. So, now we're going to jump into the big ones. These are big changes, so they don't necessarily all work together. Here are a couple of ideas for the Swedes. The Swedes could have been Russian agents who found and recruited Vanya before the Academy found her. They could be manipulating her because of her memory loss. Now, this of course would make the Swedes a third party. So if you still have to have them working for the Commission, I think they need to be deadly. They need to be Hazel and Cha-Cha 2.0 in terms of preparedness. They should have files on all of the Umbrella Academy with the way that their powers work, and they should be coming up with ways to counter them in a fight. Hazel and Cha-Cha struggled in the first season, so the Commission should send people who are more prepared to deal with superpowered siblings. I think it could be really fun if during fight scenes that involve Allison, the Swedes were wearing fluffy earmuffs. Or they don't bring projectile weapons to a fight with Diego. They bring baseball bats that he can't redirect. I think them coming to every fight prepared to deal with the Umbrella Academy would make them a much more threatening presence. A presence that they really didn't have this season. They just get killed over and over again. The second big fix is that I don't think Harlan needed to be as involved. He didn't need to gain powers from Vanya, nothing like that. It's really weird to me that in that final episode, there are 3 characters with Vanya's powers. I think that if there's going to be a character who has Vanya's powers and is at risk of losing control, it should be Lila, who can imitate powers but never had the time to hone them. So when she gets Vanya's powers, which are difficult to control, she loses it. It would be so easy. It would make Lila more sympathetic, and it would also really juice up that fight scene. There's a great opportunity for her to be having fun with the powers. Fun, but also not really having control over them. It would be kind of humorous to watch her bouncing around as she has Luther's super strength, but has never had it before. So every time she takes a step, she's kind of shooting off of the ground. Or when she's redirecting projectiles, she's redirecting them the wrong way. When she's stealing Allison's powers, she doesn't know what to say. She's kind of stumbling over her words or saying something that doesn't quite have the impact that she wanted. The Umbrella Academy could have their butts kicked by her, but she could be goofing around and not really sure of herself. Then, the last person who she takes the power from is Vanya, and that's when she starts to lose control because it's a power that is so much more than the others that she has no clue what to do with it, and she just starts radiating energy, threatening to blow up, and then they have to calm her down. And there could be a really touching moment between her, Diego, and Vanya, while Diego is trying to connect to her on a human level, and Vanya is trying to tell her how she understands that it's crazy to have those powers, but that she's been manipulated and that she just needs to calm down. If the season had built to that, it would have been much more satisfying. Another big fix is that I don't think the handler should have been working for the Commission this season. Her goals just were very muddled when she's trying to seize power from the Commission, but she also has this superpowered kid, and it looks like she could be collecting her own Umbrella Academy. So, stick to the second one. She has been banished by the Commission. That's why she's using Lila. Lila is her best chance of seizing power. It's like her backup plan. And then her goals throughout the season can be, she doesn't really want to kill the Umbrella Academy anymore, but her thing is that she wants power. She wants to take down the Commission in some way. Diego should not have been obsessed with the murder of JFK. If he's going to be obsessed with someone, it should be his mother. Diego should be hell-bent on finding out what happened to the woman who their robot mom was based on and why. And that could be his whole obsession for the season. He wants to save his mom from becoming robot mom because his mom is such an important part of his backstory. Even if it threatens the timeline, that's okay. Diego can be irrational about the one thing that is so meaningful to him. Just a few more. The Majestic 12 don't have a place in this show. There's already a secret society interfering with history. It's the Commission. Another fix? Before Elliot gets killed, he should have found out a crucial piece of information that he needs to tell the Umbrella Academy. That builds tension. The last fix doesn't work with the one I just said. I think that there is a way to do this season where the character of Elliot and the character of Carl are the same person. Carl could just be a very paranoid person who believes in aliens, and so him believing that Vanya's a Russian agent fits in it. It's interesting, and it would make him a much more threatening person this season, with the ability to do a lot of damage. So, now that I've gone through those, I want to talk about my theory for what happened during the production of the second season that caused all of these problems. Season 2 was originally written with the Umbrella Academy being in their kid bodies, but either the child actors weren't pulling through, or a Netflix executive said, hey, people loved the cast in the first season. You can't just make them kids for this entire thing. No one's going to watch it. This change in production would explain a lot of the problems I had with this season. Another reason I believe this theory is because there are tons of Hargreaves scenes that have no purpose. But this funeral scene with Ben might have been from that original script. The writers for the show are very good. They're adapting comics that are super difficult to translate to screen. That's why I'm surprised that this season didn't work as well as the first one. Anyways, that concludes my video on why I think Umbrella Academy Season 2 missed the mark. I couldn't have done this without my friend Evdokiya. She wrote about half of the stuff that you're hearing me talking about, and she did a lot of the editing for this episode, so definitely go check her out. She's a filmmaker. She has a website. It'll all be in the description. I'm Bayden. I make films sometimes, and I'm hoping to make more of these sort of videos. If you disagree with me, why don't you leave a comment? I'm happy to discuss this with anyone and everyone. Hopefully this hasn't tainted your view of the show. So, with all that said and done, thank you for watching, and I'll see ya never.